Hello, everyone. This is Vivek Atray, and I've got with me the English cricket legend David Gower. And David is here to talk about the first Test match, which just concluded at Chennai. England won that Test match famously already, and England seems very much prepared for this tour of India. India, after that high in Brisbane at the Gabba, where they beat Australia against all odds with new players, 20 players in that series tried out, very emotional, very emphatic victory in the end. And here we are back to the dust in a way, having lost to England, which seems to be very well prepared this time. David, how are you doing? Looking good.
Well, yeah, just reflecting on what you've said already. England, it's interesting because, of course, before the series, as you rightly said, India had a fantastic time in Australia, did some extraordinary things there, came back from the lowest of the lows in that first Test match to win a series. So immense credit gained there in Australian conditions, which historically, way back, India never coped with, but over the last decade plus, we've seen them much more competitive there. England, of course, prepared in Sri Lanka, where it was generally stated that Sri Lanka were not up to much. You know, Sri Lanka are not at their strongest at the moment. They've lost over the last few years some of their best players. They made horrible mistakes in those two Test matches in Gaul, but England played well enough to win comfortably. And the key thing, which we'll talk about no doubt at greater length, was Joe Root and the runs he made, because he put England almost single-handedly into very, very strong positions from where they were going to win. And that's exactly what happened in Chennai over the last few days. And although the strength of the opposition might have been different, one of the great unknowns in this game, I think, is the X factor of confidence. So England, okay, they beat Sri Lanka. Yep, they beat them well. Joe Root came to India in fantastic form. And it's amazing how even if you play, for instance, well against a very good club side, you take confidence from that and you can play well against the best as well. So, I mean, lots of things fell into place for Joe. Winning the toss wasn't a bad thing to do. Batting on the first couple of days when the pitch was very much at its best and gave absolutely nothing to the bowlers. All these things are factors that helped. But at the same time, you've got to acknowledge what was an absolutely supreme performance from Joe, because he is in literally the form of his life at the moment.
Absolutely, David, he is. And if you compare with 4 years ago, when India actually allowed England they made 400 and something, and India replied with 750 in that Test match in Chennai. And actually, India won that Test match with Karun Nair hitting a triple century. And Karun Nair is not even in the IPL teams now, let alone the Indian team. Time flies. But what I want to ask you, David, is what is the difference between this English side and previous sides? They won 2-0 on spinning pitches in Sri Lanka. And here, of course, he won the toss, but the spinners are bowling better. The batsmen are playing the spin better. And your pacers are bowling better. What has gone right this time?
You've just about named it all, I think. If you look back, for instance, the last time England won in India under Alistair Cook, you had some of the same ingredients. You had two batsmen on that tour, played out of their skins, Alistair Cook himself and Kevin Pietersen. So they came back from a loss in the first Test match, which is never easy anywhere in the world, let alone India. And they put the runs on the board that allowed them to put pressure on Indian batsmen. They also had two better spinners. Panesar and Swan are, I'm afraid to say, better spinners than Leach and Bess. And that's just the state of play as it stands. I mean, both Leach and Bess have made interesting progress over the last couple of years. And when you've got a pitch that starts to do things, then you just need to keep calm, keep your heads, bowl in the right places. And some of those deliveries that, for instance, Jack Leach produced in the second innings were exactly that. The slow left armer's dream, sort of drifting in, pitching, turning, hitting the top of off stump. That's what you want to be able to do every day if you possibly can. But pitches don't allow you that in most cases until day 4, day 5. So they did the job between them. And whenever I've seen England dominate, it's because they've brought together all departments. So you need enough batsmen scoring runs. Not everyone has to score runs, but 2 or 3 getting big runs, and you have a total on the board. You need maybe 3 or 4 out of 5 in an attack doing the job, and then you've got enough pressure sustained at both ends. So when you had that brilliant over from James Anderson, you had some consistent bowling from the spinners. In the first innings, England again just kept their heads, kept things tight, picked up wickets at the right time. So basically, it's one of those games, or as I look back on it, without being too nonchalant about it or trying to dismiss it as one of the, everything seemed to fit into place. When you've got your captain scoring a double hundred, that sets the tone in absolutely the right way. And as I say, just to repeat myself, Joe's in the form of his life. He's in the sort of mood where he now knows how to make it count. He plays spin probably better than anyone in the world at this moment. Those three test matches in a row, 2 in Sri Lanka, 1 in Chennai so far, where he scored an absolute mountain of runs, just prove it, because he knows exactly what he's trying to do. I mean, there will always be a time, as a batsman, you always think or you should remember in your mind that there'll be a day where you get the unplayable delivery early, and instead of making a double hundred, you've made 2, and that happens to everyone. And as long as it's just a blip and you carry on making runs after that, you feel fine. It's when you have these purple patches, every coach, every man who's ever played the game before you will say, make the most of it, because at some stage, things will change. So while you're making runs, carry on making it and just enjoy it while it lasts.
Absolutely, David. And Joe Root even crossed your total for a career during the course of this mammoth number of runs he's scoring these days. He's pretty much scaling the peak, and only it seems that Alistair Cook will be left for him to chase. But let's talk a little bit more about the spinners. You rightly said that Joe Root is probably playing the spinners better than anyone. Ashwin is probably the senior most spinner in these two sides at the moment. And India's support spinners weren't that great, as Virat Kohli also said. Leach and Bess actually bowled extremely well on the other hand. So I think things are pretty much evened out. It seems the Englishmen are playing the spinners better, and the English spinners are bowling better to the Indian batsmen. It seems the edge has gone for India.
Well, okay, but before anyone starts panicking, across the the subcontinent, I mean, there are circumstances that, for instance, I'm sure that when Joe Root gives his team talk, when the management, when the team prepares for this second test match, which will be, I guess, on a very similar pitch. I mean, who knows? I can't imagine it being much different. When they start their preparation, when they start their speeches for this next game, they'll be saying, take nothing for granted, because the circumstance of that first test match, first of all, can I say this? I was rather confused, bemused, and in the end, rather annoyed, because in that week building up to that first test match, we kept getting reports over here in England and across the world, no doubt, from the groundsman saying he was going to leave grass on this pitch. And we were all talking about, oh, that's interesting, because you've got Anderson and maybe Broad and Archer, you've got Bumrah, you've got Ishant, you've got some very good seamers on both teams. They'll like the look of grass. There was all this talk about the SG ball having a bigger seam, a harder core, be a better ball to bowl with. All of this turned out to be absolute rubbish. And all you ended up with was what you might call a typical Chennai pitch, absolutely rock solid to start with. It wore the ball down, it wore the bowlers down. And when it started to wear down itself, it started to turn at the right sort of time halfway through the game. So by the time you finish the game, you've got more turns. So I mean, that's how in many ways you expect an Indian pitch to play. So all that sort of pre-game rubbish rather sort of upset the apple cart. But that's what's likely to happen again, let's face it. So when that coin goes up at the start of that second test, whoever wins the toss, what are they going to do, I wonder? Are they going to stick him in? Probably not. They're going to say, right, our turn to make big runs and put pressure on the opposition. If it's England again, that puts Joe Root's side in a great position. If they can replicate the batting performance of that first test match. If Virat is the man winning the toss, it'll take him, less than the blink of an eye to say, we're batting, and he'll be back in that dressing room. All his team is saying, fantastic, well done, captain. That's the best thing you've done all week. And now we've got to make runs. So, things can change around very, very quickly. And I think, Ashwin is still a magnificent bowler. He's got all the tricks in the trade. He's got experience. If he gets conditions that are better for him, not bowling on what Ishant called a road for those first 2 days, then he'll be more dangerous for sure. And England have to. There's always this thing. Whatever you've done last week, you've got to try and do it again next week. And that's never easy necessarily to replicate. So there are lots of things can change. But yes, absolutely. England, the word I used before, confidence will be high. And people in the team will draw confidence from watching Joe bat, from watching Ben Stokes bat, from watching Dom Sibley get runs. They will all draw confidence from seeing these three very different players getting runs in different ways. And because you never want to rely on one man, so you want everyone to sort of think they are capable of contributing.
I like what you say about three very different players, because I was going to talk about the batting, and Joe Root being the complete champion batsman in the peak of his form, as you rightly said. Sibley played about 200 deliveries or more for his 80 odd, and he played very well. He could play the spin, keep blocking. And Ben Stokes probably played a few defensive strokes and then hit one for six in his first 10 runs. Very different players, but England's batsmen probably showed greater sense of application. Till the first innings of the Indian team, the pitch was still a featherbed, and India had no excuse to be scoring 200 runs, maybe 200 and something runs less, and actually allowing England to take a decision whether they should make India follow on. So the batting, if you talk of England, have they discovered the ideal combination for Test cricket? Are these players, talk us through Sibley and Rory Burns? I mean, are these guys going to last for a long time to come?
Well, I mean, Sibley, let's look at it. Over the last 12 months, just over 12 months, I was in Cape Town at the start of last year when he made his first real big contribution. And he has, apart from 3 innings out of 4 in Sri Lanka, which is all part of the learning curve. Let's face it, however good you are, at the start of your career, you're going to encounter different conditions, different countries, different bowlers, different problems, and you have to learn how to deal with them all as you go. And if you succeed year by year in conquering each challenge, that's how you become a good player, then a great player. So he's got promise, but he is very much of, say, he's the equivalent of a Pujara, who will take his time to make his runs, who will, in the end, will back his defence and will take longevity at the crease as a method. Whereas Stokes is a very different player. He's matured a lot. I mean, I've seen Ben for the last few years where we know he can play the most fantastic shots. He's got a good cricket brain. For a man of his ilk, he's got a better cricket brain, I think, than a lot of people might give him credit for. And his instinct is very well honed. So he will make runs around the world. He'll continue to do so because he's a very talented, very confident player. Joe Root, we talked about. We said pretty much everything we can say about Joe, because he's now back in that same league as Virat, as Williamson, as Steve Smith, all of whom, when they're on a roll like this, make runs for fun and make it look easy. And it's great to watch each of them in their own different ways. But it is putting together, in terms of England and the question you're asking, will they last? Well, I think Sibley's going to be around for a while. I think the guy who unfortunately missed out in that first Test match because of that freak injury, slipping on the stone a couple of days before the game, Zach Crawley, I think he's got an awful lot of talent, very natural talent, and a very good attitude. And I think he will make a lot of runs over the next decade as well. But that wrist injury will keep him out, sadly, from a series that would have been a fantastic learning experience for him. So I think, yes, there's enough there to be going on with. I mean, people like Ollie Pope, he's incredibly talented. There are others waiting in the wings. You see the rotation policy in the bowling department, which reflects the modern ethos, the modern way of doing things with all these various forms of cricket and the workload and the bubbles. And things are so very different now to the way they used to be. But I think England have a certain strength in depth.
Yeah, but this rotation policy often baffles me. I mean, Test matches are the big thing, aren't they? Why would a player want to miss even one Test match? I mean, it's a modern way of thinking. I mean, Jos Buttler, I believe, is going back. And Johnny Bairstow, I think, is a great batsman, very good batsman. He's not in the team. And, of course, Crawley got injured, and Lawrence is in. But this rotation policy, I mean, India probably look to play their best 11 every Test match. Do you think England has a better idea of it?
Well, no, I actually agree with your point. I think, for instance, the Bairstow, having got back in the Test team, having made good runs in Sri Lanka, that's the time you want to capitalise on good form. And although he would have apparently accepted with reasonable grace the decision to rest him again because of the white ball stuff that follows, I think in his heart he would probably be saying to himself and to the rest of us, if he was allowed to, I'd love to have played a Test match or the Test series in India as well. But it's not to be. I mean, the Buttler thing I find very bemusing. You've got because you've got a test when you're having had that fantastic first test match. In most people's books, you would say at the end of that, right, we've done everything right. Everyone's done something useful. Let's not let it slip now. And the first thing you do is pretty much pick an unchanged team and say, right, go on, lads, do it again, and keep the advantage. But inevitably, for instance, Anderson would have been, he's apparently said, give me another go, please, because automatically he'd have probably been rested for this next one. And yet, for the sake of 10 glorious minutes, he can change a game, or even less than that. One glorious over, he can change a game. He can win a game for you. Yes, I mean, people like Stuart Broad are in still very good form. We saw that in Sri Lanka. So you've got people to come in who will do a good job, come what may. But yes, this rotation thing, we have to remember that there is this whole issue of COVID, of bubbles, of biosecure areas, of the mental health of these players. I mean, it's bad enough for some of us. This is going to sound terrible. For those of us at home, I have, I'm very lucky. I have space. I have a garden. I have the ability to walk into the woods up. In terms of what we're doing in so-called lockdown here in the UK, I'm a very lucky man because I don't feel the effects in the same way as someone who's stuck in a hotel room or the equivalent thereof, a one-bedroom flat somewhere. But for these players, you've got the intensity of playing international cricket. You've got the limitations of being basically locked in hotels and these bubbles. So yes, the powers that be do have to take into consideration the effect on their mental health over a long period of time. Therefore, I mean, for instance, it's another month or so after Test matches are finished as the one-dayers go on. If you're going to have people, a month in Sri Lanka, 2 months in India, basically locked down, then you've got to be very careful about that. So there is that extra element which is, forced upon us by the current circumstances. But nonetheless, I mean, I do agree with the point that when you've got things going well, ideally you want to try and keep the advantage by playing as good a team as you possibly can for the next game. I mean, let's face it, 3 games left. If when it was 0 all to play for, now it's 1-0. That's right. I mean, if people are concerned, for instance, about the World Test Championship final, well, India know they've got to win a couple of games now. Likewise, England, who are slightly behind, or were slightly behind, know they've got to win another couple more. So, there is an awful lot to play for.
There's an awful lot to play for, and I totally agree with you. These are rare times, and perhaps that, to that extent, is justified in rotating these players. But I want to ask you, David, about the Indian batting as well. We've got a combination of 3 youngsters, Gill, Pant, and Sundar. Sundar played very well in the first innings, as you saw, and even at the Gabba. And we've got these 4 veterans. We've got Rohit, Kohli, Rahane, and Pujara. And Pujara, of course, had a magnificent series in Australia. Rahane led from the front in Melbourne, at least. He scored a century there. Kohli came back after that 36 all out and his 72 in the first test. Gill started blooming from the very first match. He's been hitting 50 after 50, though not converting yet. And Pant has probably been, in the form of his life again. Like Root, he's making 90 after 90, if not 100 after 100. So what do you think of the Indian batting? And do you think they have the capacity to bounce back in this series?
Well, of course they do. You outlined there quite rightly the fact that all of those players you mentioned have succeeded in some shape or form in the last 2-3 months. Rahane we've seen for years now. He's an experienced player and, of course, captained the side in Australia when Virat came home and made that crucial 100 in Melbourne, as you so rightly say. So it's not a long time ago that he was doing all the right things with a bat in hand against one of the top 4 sides in the world. You've got the youngsters who equally so on that tour showed their mettle. And you've got Virat, who is undoubtedly one of the top 2, if not the best player in the world. So, you've got people there who are eminently capable of turning things around, as, just to remind you again, as happened in Australia. What was happening in Australia was absolutely extraordinary, given that every pundit across the world went, after that first innings in Adelaide, they went, oh my God, this is going to be, this is 4-0, 4-5, this is 10-0. They thought, they just thought, they predicted mayhem, and they didn't get it. Likewise, I know former colleagues of mine, people like Michael Vaughan have who is always very outspoken in those pithy one-liners of his on Twitter. You get you make big predictions before a game has even started, before a series has even started. The expectation is that India, after Australia and being at home, would be the dominant force in this series. They still could be. England will say they'll be very much aware that India, with the right circumstances, and again, I come back to the same thing, which is, the toss of the coin, the start of this next Test match. If India win that toss, bat on a good pitch for 2 days, and make a lot of runs, that puts them in the driving seat to try and get the series back to 1-1 in a hurry. So, that's it's literally going to be, we're going to be watching that coin. It's going to go up, 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 up. It's going to come down, 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 and down, and down. There's going to be 18 cameras looking to see what the coin's made of, which way it's come up, who gets the microphone thrust under their noses, saying, "What are you going to do?" And from that moment on, there will be expectation.
It's very well said, David. Actually, I'm going to ask you about the Twitter part later. Vaughan and Jofra Archer and people like even Peterson. Kevin Peterson is tweeting in Hindi, in the Indian languages nowadays. But let me ask you about
when you say sorry, Vivek, when you say Kevin Peterson is tweeting in Hindi, even English isn't his first language. So there's someone sorry, that's unfair.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I don't know who his scribe is, but I hope the spelling's good.
I think the spellings is good. The Hindi is impeccable, and he's obviously got someone, a very good friend from the IPL. Jofra Archer, on the other hand, has these one-word tweets, which I often try to decipher, but I fail at times. And Michael Vaughan probably goes from one extreme to the other. I mean, he just either it's 4-0 to Australia, or it's 4-0 to India, or 4-0 to England. So he has to kind of balance his thinking a little bit.
Michael, let's face it, Michael was a very, very good captain. He's an interesting broadcaster. He has strong opinions, but as regards Twitter, he has extremes only. And you just need to understand that. I mean, I use Twitter in a sort of a slightly more benign fashion, more whimsical, as you might expect from me. But no, Michael is very big on the big statements. So, and he sometimes he retracts it 10 minutes later. If he's forced to make a change, by day 1, day 2, or the end of a game, he'll make it. So that's the way he operates.
That's the way he operates. But I want to ask you a little bit about these two very exciting fast bowlers. We've already talked about Anderson. We have Archer on England's side and Bumrah here. They're still new in Test cricket, and they are amazingly talented. Even on this Chennai pitch, for one spell, Archer made the ball talk. He got Rohit with something that really flew. And Bumrah as well. How do you rate these two?
Very highly. Jofra has the great ability to bowl quick and make it look easy. I sympathise with him, actually. There were a few complaints last summer, in the English summer, about Jofra, because it is the classic error from the observer, I think, although you're never quite sure. When people make it look easy and then for some reason it doesn't work, then the instant accusation is, oh, you're not really trying. So when he drops his pace, people think he's not really putting the effort in. I would be quite sympathetic to him on this one. I think he obviously has huge natural talent. He's got good experience of India and Indian conditions from his days in IPL, where he's done exceptionally well. In Test cricket, he's done some very, very interesting things already in a short space of time. And yet he's still a young man in terms of experience and still learning how it works best for him. And you see that strapping on his arms and all the rest of it. But he's a natural athlete. He's a natural bowler. He's a natural cricketer. And you take what you get with him. And he'll give you some really good stuff. But I think the other part of that is that Joe is learning, as you do as a captain, you sort of sometimes change your approach a little bit as to how you use a man, when to go to him, when to leave him rest, when to leave him be. But I think they understand Jofra a lot better now than they did maybe 12 months ago. And he will give you stuff. I mean, going to Bumrah, those of us that have watched him, first of all in IPL, then in one-day internationals and the Test matches he's played so far, he's an extraordinary bowler. It looks wrong, but it works. This is not one of your classical actions. And in fact, sometimes when you have something unusual, that's actually a bonus for you as a bowler, because batsmen are sort of trying to work out where the ball's coming from or what's going to happen next. But he has huge skill. I mean, for instance, for those of us of a certain age, that thing called a Yorker, whether it's a one-day game or a test match, can be mighty handy. And yet, over the last decade, a lot of bowlers have given up on it. Either they're not good enough to bowl it properly, or it's just too risky for them because they get it slightly wrong in things like IPL. They see the ball disappearing out the stadium again. But he has nailed that one particular delivery. He gets the ball to move. He has pace. And everything I've read about Jasprit Bumrah suggests that batsmen at the other end find him an absolute handful. And that's the biggest compliment you can pay to any bowler, that if the batsman at the other end finds you a problem, then you must be doing something right as a bowler.
Yes, David. And now let's compare the two captains. I mean, Joe Root's strategy obviously worked very well, and he's a very calm, understated kind of player on the field, especially while fielding and batting as well. Virat, aggressive, excited, and he's lost his last 4 test matches, whereas Rahane won 2. I'm not asking you whether Rahane should become the captain of India, but if you could compare Root's style with Kohli's, that would be good enough.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're very obviously different characters. Virat is very animated in the field, very noisy. I mean, he is a passionate player and a passionate captain. I mean, we're all of us who've ever captained any sort of side, you're driven by instinct, you're driven by whatever works for you. And this is why for instance, when countries or counties or provincial sides or club sides, when you change a captain and you get a different style, sometimes that helps the development of a team, because you go from sometimes sort of the disciplinarian to the man who's a bit more laissez-faire, something in between. You get different styles which allow people to experience sort of different ways of playing as players underneath them. Now, for Virat, that passion works beautifully when everything else slots into place. And let's face it, captains are, at the end of the day, they're as good as their players and as good as the results, yes. But if, for instance, you get the right rub of the green during a game, you can be made to look good. If you've got 500-600 runs on the board, there's a lot of things you can do more easily as the captain in the field in the next day or so than if you've only got 200 runs on the board. And for instance, so again, take the circumstance of that first test match. Virat, if he'd had the luxury of batting first, who knows? It could have been a very, very different game. So it's what happens next that counts for him. Joe, yes, Joe has settled into the role. He's not as demonstrative. He's less animated in the field, but he's got that sense of humor. He's got that sharp mind. I know from speaking to Joe over the years, from a young child onwards, he was asking questions of senior players when he was playing probably as a 12-year-old in club cricket. Playing early days of county cricket, questioning senior players, investigating tactics, investigating everything. So he's built up over that time a lot of knowledge. And then the only thing you cannot buy, as it were, is experience of leading teams. You have to do it. And if you get it right for long enough, you get to do it for long enough to get much better at it. So he's now at a stage of his career where he can suddenly say to himself, do you know what? I've now won as many games as anyone as England captain, because he's now equal with Michael Vaughan. Both of them from Yorkshire, yes, but different sort of characters, different sorts of captain, but now successful in their own right. So you can build on that. And the more confidence you have in your judgment as a captain, of course, the easier it is to say to someone, right, have a rest, to say to someone, can have a bowl, to put a man in a strange position over there. And he's also got good backup. I'll make that point too. He's got very good backup. In the old days, let's say the old days, this makes me sound like a sort of centenarian, but in the old days, you basically
recent old days.
Well, I'm not 100 years old yet. But you basically, as captain, ran most of the show by yourself. You didn't have the analyst. You didn't have 20 backroom staff to either take a bit of pressure off or add a bit of something in. Nowadays, there's a lot more collaboration. For instance, when you saw the declaration being mooted at the end of this Chennai test match on day 4, off he goes with Chris Silverwood to talk in a quiet room somewhere about what's needed. There'll be, again, going back, you used to have conversations in the dressing room. Players would say to me, what are you going to do? Are you going to declare? Are you going to make people follow on, or whatever it might be? And you'd have those discussions in a huddle on the field, and you would, as captain, you'd say, no, my feeling is this, and you'd listen to people. Of course, you listen to people. You listen to your bowlers. You listen to those with valued opinions. And I always liked, actually, I really loved having a contribution from each and everyone, because I wanted people to be involved. That was sort of a cornerstone of my captaincy style. I wanted people to think they were important in the thinking process, not just as sort of mere automatons pushed out onto a field to do what they had to do as a batsman or a bowler. So you would have had those conversations, and Joe would have had conversations the other day, and they'd have come to some sort of conclusion, as they did, as to the best thing to do. I mean, the only thing that could have upset that whole process was if someone had been able to say, for instance, support their idea and make the runs that took the game late into that final day and put the pressure on. And then once you start to panic for time at the end of a day and you've still got 3 or 4 wickets to get out, to prize out, suddenly you start to feel very different. But if you get things going your way, as Joe did, and you pick up those wickets early enough in the day to take the pressure off, well, then you just maintain your dominance. So he was able to do everything he wanted to in that game. And the test comes exactly as soon as this in the next game. You've got to try and do it again. You've got to lead from the front again if you possibly can. Make the most of whatever circumstances you find yourself in. And again, if he finds himself batting second, then he could easily find that his team, the team under pressure on that 5th day again. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. In fact, we'll be here to review that test match as well. But before we go, David, I've got this very interesting comment from a viewer. He says, David hit a 6-over cover at Chandigarh in a one day, and I still cherish that shot's memory. So, David, I want to ask you, I mean, you had a lot of fun, it seemed, while batting. You made these 8,000 plus elegant runs. And you are not saying this, I'm saying it, that someone like Jeffrey Boycott or Graham Gooch probably made runs with less fun or less elegance. I'm saying it, right? You're not. The point is that who in today's era do you think is having fun while making lots of runs? Do you find some players with natural flair?
I mean, the obvious, yes, absolutely. And I've already mentioned, I'm sure I've mentioned them all, as it were, already in this last half hour, because
yeah, you have.
Joe, I mean, in this sort of form, and you look at him, he has that sort of little gentle smile on his face. He has a sort of, a confidence, a sort of relaxed air when he's out there, and he is having fun. But the trick, of course, is however much fun you think you're having, you have to try and remember you will have even more fun if you stay there long enough to make really big scores. So it's no use having fun for an hour. It might be fun for an hour, but it doesn't actually achieve what you really want at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we're going, well, I wish I'd stayed in, wish I'd got more. And Joe's certainly got that nailed for now. But people like, say, I mean, those top four in the world, acknowledged, I think, by viewers all around the world. So it's Virat,
Yes.
Steve Smith, there's Kane Williamson, who is brilliant, a run machine in his own, and now Joe back in that same echelon again. They will all have fun in slightly different ways. And I mean, I know, for instance, Jeffrey Boycott, bless him, who was a very senior player when I first played for the England team, and was, as we know, takes the business of making runs very, very seriously.
Very seriously. Yeah.
Very seriously indeed. Fun for him was different. I mean, it's not what everyone else thinks is fun, but him blocking away for days was fun. That was his version of fun. Graham Gooch turned himself from actually a fun player into a very serious player in comparative terms, in a sort of very easy way of putting it. And Graham became much more efficient. And therefore, you've got to balance out so that little bit of sort of short-term fun. And some of the things we all do at certain stages when you are having a little bit of fun at the right time, they are there to be enjoyed, and they're all part of the pleasure of batting and putting on a show for the crowd. But at the end of it, most people look back with the satisfaction of having got it right. So the big scores are the ones you remember. The big scores that leads to victories, those are the ones you remember even more. So at some stage you have to kind of just trim the fun back a little bit, just in order to make yourself a most effective part of a team.
Very good point, David. I really like that one. Trim the fun back a little bit. We got two young players who would really benefit by listening to that. Shubman Gill, who times the ball superbly well, and Prithvi Shaw's actually out of the team for some technical lapses, and he got out early in Australia. Both seem to be having a lot of fun while at the crease, but they're not batting long enough, although Gill is a superb player. But let's hope that we get more runs from these youngsters on both sides in the coming matches. And we'll be back with another review of the test match very soon, it seems, next week. David, lovely to have had this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and I'll look forward to the next one.
Thank you, David.